Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Turner, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm the Director of Technology for the Diocese of Washington, and we are pleased to bring you this session on Zoom Church, the expanded table. As you may have seen, this is the second of two sessions related to online church. The first one was focused on some ways to utilize the Zoom platform for online church and ways to present your service and content to optimize the experience for you and your parishioners. We live in extraordinary times in the current pandemic, and all that has meant for reshaping how we have been forced to rethink about what our congregations can be, adopting technology in our worship and ministry in ways that we may not have thought possible or even acceptable before this began. The Zoom platform has been an accessible and valuable means of continuing our worshiping communities online. Our panelists for this session are Reverend Bruce Reyes-Chow, pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Palo Alto, California, and a leading ministry consultant and ministry coach, and the Reverend Jenifer Gamber, who's been assistant rector and chaplain in St. Patrick's Episcopal Church and Day School in Washington, D.C., and is a leading author and leader and author in the field of Christian education and formation. And joining the diocesan staff soon as special mission of the School of Christian Faith and Leadership. We realize here the realities that not everyone is using Zoom for online worship, and that some are also exploring the potential for live streaming. Several realities we need to acknowledge in this conversation that firstly, establishing and growing online communities is a major opportunity for greater accessibility to worship and community. Many of these need to continue to grow and become part of the life and fabric of the church in the modern world. And that we may also, in some cases, and at the right time, add live streaming or a version of that to this picture of the expanded table, the hybrid church. We hope that this session is just the beginning of this conversation, and that it will continue in the form of plenary conversations across our diocese, as well as in the regions and within each parish. Sharing what works well helps others to learn and grow and enriches us all as a denomination and as the Christian church. Bruce has been a leader in the online community of churches using Zoom for online worship. And we'll be leading this session on the idea of the expanded table and starting to think about this model. As well as being a pastor and ministry coach, Bruce leads a Facebook group on Zoom called Zoom Faith, Encouragement, Expertise, and Community. A quick housekeeping note before we start: please feel free to use the chat feature to share your own thoughts or links with others during the session. And please use the Q&A feature located on your webinar window to ask a question during the session, and we'll be answering all questions at the end of the presentation. So Bruce, I'm turning it over to you for your presentation.
Great. Thank you all. So sorry I wasn't able to be with you face-to-face last week. It was quite the exciting time for Peter and I to try to get me back onto a meeting. What it did teach us was that Zoom security, once you get kicked off, is excellent. So no matter how good of a hacker you think you are, it's hard to get back on. And anyway, so we're going to talk today about hybrid church and what it means, especially as communities, houses of worship, Christian communities, churches are thinking about regathering or relaunching. There's lots of language out there about this. And so I'll share a little bit about myself and where I'm serving, and then some tactics for us to begin to think about. But one of the ways that we have been kind of phrased this in our tradition for many of us and in our congregation is this idea that we never actually closed, that we really, the churches that we're seeing doing really well with this didn't really talk about closing or canceling. They really spoke about community just being done differently or being done in a different place or in a different way. And so it's not as if the communal experience of church ended, it just shifted. And the better that we've been able to adapt and to kind of roll with that, the better we're going to figure out and adapt to where we're headed next. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this concept of the hybrid church. But let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I think it's important that you all know about my context and where I'm coming from, because you'll have to translate for your own particular community. This is a picture of me back in like 88 or something. I just graduated from high school, was working at a law firm. And I love this picture because the computer itself, and that may have been the last time I've ever worn a tie. So I always throw this one up. But I'm a Presbyterian Church USA person from the West Coast, born and raised in California, come out of a historically Filipino-American congregation in Stockton, California. This is a picture of the church that my grandfather is second from the right. My family were founding members of this congregation. It was what I consider a progressive church before I knew what progressive meant, and a church that is historically Filipino, but is in the part of Stockton that is one of the rougher parts of Stockton. So it's where a lot of the immigrants would come over the years. And so our church is actually a pretty diverse congregation. But I grew up with Presbyterian roots from the beginning. I now pastor a church in Palo Alto, California. Been here about a year. I'm the pastor and head of staff, but I'm 3/4 time. So it's kind of an odd thing where I'm a head of staff with other full-time staff, but I'm not full-time because I do other things like this and enjoy that work. As you can see from this picture, the congregation that I'm pastoring is fairly white and it's pretty old. But it's a church that has activist roots and is a church that is just learning how to retell its story. And so this is actually an opportunity for this church to continue to tell that story in different ways. I am also have a familial online lab, basically. These are my 3 children. You get bonus points if you know what picture this is mimicking. I don't know if any of you, I'll put it in the chat room if you actually know what this is, and it probably means you have teenagers in your house. But I have 24, 19, and it's almost 17. So we've seen the trends around social media and technology as they've kind of moved into it and through it. And now we're seeing it again as they're all engaging in online education. And then I'm a practitioner. I've been doing this for a long time. Somebody just reminded me back in 2010, I was leading a worship service that was completely on Twitter. And there were a group of us that just led worship every Sunday afternoon after our own churches. And so this is something that's not new, but we're always kind of trying to figure out and engage new technologies and new ways to do things. If you want to get in touch with me in any form, Twitter is usually the best way to interact, and I'm Reyes-Chow on every platform possible. And then now, just so I'm pretty fancy when I do my online worship. There's my this is my favorite outfit. This is my collar, sweats, and slippers. There you go. Okay, so there's a little bit about me. Let me tell you a little bit about what I'm going to do today. So I want to give you some building blocks for thinking about this idea about hybrid worship. I want to think about some theological understandings for you and ask some questions around that. I'm going to talk about the importance of lived community, and then we'll talk about the space and then some logistics. So I'm going to walk through those fairly quickly. I will also share these slides with Peter so he can send those out to you, which will include my slides from last week as well. The first thing is this. You have to be able to articulate if you actually believe that you can do this. I mean, I've talked with pastors who aren't really, they just don't think you can do community beyond the sanctuary. And that's not a dig on folks. That's just, I think it's really important. It kind of like when we talk about who Jesus is in our life, wherever you come from on the theological spectrum, if you can't articulate that, folks aren't going to be able to, you're not going to be able to support it. You're not going to build around it, whatever it may be. You're going to have to begin to articulate that for your community, the people you're working with, so that they know that this is not just a tactic you're using to do something, but it's a calling that you're feeling. And so as you're thinking about this, I think the question is, do you believe in some kind of hybrid experience of church? And really asking that difficult question of yourselves, can you champion a theological understanding of being called beyond our buildings and our borders? The other piece of this is that to ask yourselves, is there such thing as real church? Because if we begin to default that real church happens in a particular way, that's going to influence and flavor all of the ways in which you engage in trying to create hybrid space. If the real part is in person and then we happen to do this other part, that is not going to be a sustainable kind of culture that you're going to build. That's simply, we have a real church here and the rest of you can see it and experience it, but it's really happening in this space. So beginning to think about that question for yourself is, do you believe there's like the real church and then there's the rest of the church? Or can that real church be everybody engaging it together? And the challenging question is, as folks are beginning to move back into sanctuaries or think about how they're going to do that, is that when do we cross the line between worshiping God and worshiping what we do? And I think that for many mainline historic communities, sometimes we begin to worship our liturgy and our practices and our styles to the point where we are no longer worshiping God. That if we're going to be drawn so much to the specifics of what we do, that it leaves out this opportunity for the expansive nature of God to kind of poke into our lives and our world, then I think that's a problem. So as you're headed back, the inertia, I'll talk a little about the inertia to head back to what once was is going to be really, really strong. And how you challenge, question, hold that conversation with your folks is going to be really important, because the default is going to be really strong to go back. Well, what did we do before? Let's get as close to that as possible. When hybrid and looking at the addition and integration of online participants expands the way that you can think about how you engage in worship. It doesn't become such a static kind of experience. So let me tell you about the church that I'm serving. So this past week, we decided that we're not meeting again until 2021. So we've just made the call. We're not going to be kind of stuck in this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We're not going to try to figure out how do we set up pathways so that everybody walks counterclockwise through our sanctuary. We're not going to put tape out and try to figure out how many people we can put in. We're not taking reservations. We're not going to tell people they can't come into a gathering. We've just basically said we are not going to even attempt to do worship in our gatherings in person until 2021. I actually think we're not going to get really close to that probably until next spring, in a way that allows people to really experience worship together. My big thing as a pastor is the two things people are missing the most are singing and touching. And I think it's kind of cruel to bring people back into a space and tell them the two things that you're drawn to the most, you can't do. And so we're just trying to get as close to that in our online experience as we can. And plus, the idea of taking reservations for worship and then telling people who show up they can't come in, just it goes counter to what I think our worship experience is supposed to be like. Anyway, so a little bit about how we thought about this. I want to offer you these questions to think about it as we were venturing through, are we going to open up again? We took about 3 weeks to have this conversation around what are the possibilities that God may be revealing before us. And that was really the most important one, that folks are really excited about this new way of being church that they would have never imagined. And so where is God speaking to us as a church that's trying to retell its story? How are we about engaging that work? And so that's a little bit of the discernment questions that we went through. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I think the only way that this hybrid thing will work, if this is really you want to go, you have to create lived community. You have to create a community enough, because you can't, as the pastoral leadership, be the one that says all the time, reminding people all the time, the church is beyond the people who are sitting in your chairs, your pews, however you may situate yourself in your sanctuary. Folks have to miss, in some ways, they have to miss the people that they've engaged with online and have relationships with them, so that when they're sitting in a sanctuary, they don't just picture the people there, but they actually, because of their lived experience with these people who are online, they see those folks in this worship service. So that you're not creating this kind of program that you're trying to convince people of. You've already helped this community live community in a hybrid way, and you're just moving that now into a worship and sanctuary experience. So part of, before you begin to look at tactics, equipment, all those kind of things, it is only going to work if you have some lived experience of online and in-person kind of connection. So, and I'll talk a little bit about some of those things in a minute. One of the things I want to give you as some tactics around this is begin to change your language that no longer centers on physical space. So begin, as you're thinking about how you even welcome people at the beginning of a worship service, how you refer to things. What is it about? Like, are you creating a sense that this worshiping community is the community, or it's just a holdover until we get back to what we used to know? Because your visitors, your new people who are never going to set foot in your sanctuary because of where they live, they're just going to be reminded over and over and over again that as soon as this online one is done, they're all going to go back to the sanctuary, and that is not part of where I'm supposed to go. So change language that no longer centers on this idea that you are geographically or sanctuarily, I don't know if that's a word, sanctuarily bound. Create some more intimate spaces for interaction. So this is what I mean about creating these opportunities. So create, do your Bible studies, do your book groups, do your whatevers, but make sure that new people who are not part of that physical community, didn't know these other folks, are invited and integrated into those communities so that when you shift over, folks are like, oh yeah, that's right. Holly, who lives in Texas, she can't be here, but it's been great having her in these small groups. So let's think about how we do, worship so Holly can still be there. Create those communities. Be really intentional about expanding those communities beyond just the people that know each other already. So that could be that coffee hour time afterwards. It could be a new Bible study. Lots of different ways to think about this. There could be fun ways to do it. We're planning kind of like a talent show thing, open mic for our folks. We're doing a watch party on Netflix. I mean, there's just lots of different things you can create where it joins people together to have some lived community. And then I think this is going to be the hardest part for all of us, is to be proactive about pushing against the inertia of going back to what you used to do. All of us are going to step back into that sanctuary, and we default to what we knew, where things are, what things look like, how things were cultivated in the space. We have to push back, be proactive about pushing back, about going back to just exactly what you used to do before, because that is just a signal to the people who have discovered you online that wasn't real church, and now you're headed back to what the real church is. So a couple of notes about this is to curate your space. So create physical reminders that in-person community is not the center of the worship experience. This is going to feel weird if you are one of those that appreciates the aesthetics of a space. Again, create physical presence that says we are not the center of this worship experience. So a couple of things that I'm doing is we're setting up a DJ station, basically. So our table, our communion table is one thing, and then we don't call it an altar in our tradition, but there's another table, and basically that is going to have my laptop and some lighting and some things, so that people see that I'm not just talking to the folks who are sitting in those pews, and this is going to be in 2021, but I'm talking to the folks who are right there online on Zoom. And so you have this physical presence. The other piece is, so think about setting that up. You can make it look pretty. There's always ways you can make anything look beautiful. And then project the faces. So we're looking at technology now we have a huge movie screen that we're going to put up in the behind and project the faces so that folks see who's online and who's in the sanctuary. And we'll have multiple facing cameras so that people who are on Zoom can see who is there. So those are two of the things that we're beginning to think about if you really want to curate a space that feels hybrid. And then, some of this is investing in some technology. I don't know, what resources are available to you in your judicatories, but I know in some judicatories, they put money aside for churches and communities. Here's some money to go get your sanctuaries ready to go for this new normal thing, even whether it's live stream or it's Zooming or it's hybrid, whatever you're going to do, there are some funds. And then practice. Every presentation I do, the thing that goes wrong every time is we don't practice. I've been leading worship services for the last 25 years, and I'm a very casual worship leader, and I tell folks that it takes more work to seem casual than it does to seem very traditional. And folks don't believe me, but until they try it and try to wing it and then realize, oh, I should have practiced. I'm like, yeah. So I think when you're doing your technology, as you're getting used to it, always, always practice. I still run through our worship service every Saturday. I walk through, talk it through, hit my slides, do all that stuff so that on Sunday, when I'm leading that experience, I know that I've done everything I can to be prepared for it, and there aren't going to be any surprises. So always practice what you're doing. All right. For the worship space itself, for worship itself, I begin to build out your worship team. So really begin to think through how you want to go about building out a worship and tech team. So we have what we call tech deacons every Sunday. Our tech deacons are the people that are in the chat room, they're on the phone, they're the people that are helping people connect. So we've had those for the last couple of months. Our church was really early. We stopped services before the official shelter in place was mandated. So we had sent tech deacons out to some of our seniors and their assisted living homes and those kind of things to help people get online. We still are using our tech deacons for people. They call them, they know their numbers, they help them get online, dial in, however they need to connect. But these are folks that see this as ministry. Like, these are not just people who are technologically advanced, but that they have technological skills, but they see this as a ministry. We've also then built in for our chat room, where we have a very active chat room, that we have greeters. So we have greeters that come in, they chat with folks, they interact with people just like you would have greeters in your sanctuary, welcoming people and talking with people into the waiting room, just letting them know what's going on. And then during the worship service, we invite people to introduce themselves as they feel led, no matter where they're from, and our greeters give them information, talk with them, all that. And then we do have our bouncers. So I assign a few people that they have full role, full access, where they can just kick people out if need be. We actually have never been Zoom bombed. During this phase of Zoom life, we worship at about 120 people-ish. And so we've been very, very fortunate with that. So we've built this kind of new worship tech team that will continue on, who will worship from their particular spaces when we come back in 2021, whatever that may look like. So that's one thing, is to build out this other group of people who see themselves as called to ministry in the technological space. Now, your worship experience, this is take advantage of online worship. So your leadership, one of the ways to remind people that it's not just about who's in the room is have your liturgists every other Sunday be online, so that their voice is speaking into the sanctuary, so that their voice is speaking and they can see it, and you spotlighted them and their face is on the screen. So make sure that these constant reminders that it's everybody. So your liturgists, take the opportunity to bring musicians in from outside your geographic area. We have guest musicians once or twice every month, worship leaders to bring in different styles of music, to just bring in different voices. We also bring in different folks who are bringing in offering experiences and offering opportunities for our people. So we have everybody. We had somebody actually come from Calvary Women's Services. A friend of mine is the executive director in DC, and Christine came and spoke to our community and just let them know what we're doing. We have our partners that we support. We bring them in via Zoom. All kinds of opportunities for people, for you to experience things beyond the sanctuary. And the next thing I would say is, and I know this may be weird and hard to do, but preach from home on occasion. So what does it mean when the preacher is not even there? Especially, I would say, I'm working with a couple churches right now where their pastors are in that danger demographic and they don't want to go back. And their communities are working with them for them to continue to lead worship from home. And so they can do nothing but remember that this community is hybrid already, because their pastor is leading and preaching from their home. So think about these different ways of worship, of integrating in the online piece, right? We will easily go back to our physical expression of worship, but integrating in and really giving it depth and texture with that online component, that's the piece that's going to influence and shift things the most. And then the last thing, which I know is weird for some people, but I love it, I've always loved it, is encourage people to interact during worship, whether it's in the chat room, however you want to do that. Break them out in the middle of worship into groups. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do with it, but encourage interaction so that the folks who are engaged together will continually be engaged, especially on the chat room. I'm one of those that when any youth worker I've ever worked with, I'm like, don't take the youth's phones away. Just tell that they can be on them, and we encourage them to do things that are happening in worship. And it's just like I don't take phones away from adults who are in worship, and I know when they're on their phones during worship, they're not talking about worship. They've remembered something on their calendar. They have a grocery list item. Maybe they're taking notes, but probably not. So, I'm always like, just interact, tweet at me, put stuff in the chat room, whatever you want to do, but encourage people. The more people engage in worship, I mean, for me, it's like, I don't need to be heard that much at that particular moment. If I can background sound where people are engaging with one another in worship, I will take that. I am not that profound most of the time. And so really I'm like, if I could create a space where you're feeling engaged with one another and you're feeling called by God into this space to interact with a text or a prayer or something else, I will take that any day of the week, especially on Sundays. All right. Here's the big question, though, I have for you. And then we want to jump into questions, because I know I'm dropping a lot of stuff on you. Is this. Their big question is, do you have the capacity? Now, I think everybody would love to be able to do this. So, yes, I can do this. I know what I want to do. I have the technological capacity. I am right on it now, and I just can't wait to see what this happens. That's great. That's your box. No. I think it is actually a fine decision to say, I just can't do this. Now, you make some decisions around that, because, again, I would rather folks just admit that early on than to fake it and not really be into it. I just think if you say no, that doesn't mean you don't do it. It just means that you yourself may not have the capacity to actually do this. And so you got to figure out other ways. So know that you don't have the capacity. It doesn't mean you can't, your community can't do it. But I think it's important to decide whether you have the capacity. Maybe is also a great option, because you're still looking. I mean, nobody is doing this long-term on a large scale. Live streaming is different. Large groups of Zoom people interacting together with people on site, that is not, folks are not doing that. I've done it in smaller communities with people like 25 in live and 50 on Zoom, and it's possible and it's doable. And so how do you build that out long-term? It maybe is a perfectly good example. And then there's the not yet, right? There's the, well, we will be someday, not quite yet. I just think being really honest with yourself and with your community and not forcing people into something that they're not ready for, leading people into discovering how God may want us to worship and gather, that is going to be a much more sustainable and powerful way of engaging. And by us as pastoral leadership, as worship leadership, if we can answer those questions honestly, then that gives permission for your members and leaders to answer that question honestly. And when you can get folks to answer that question honestly at the beginning, admit the grief and the difficulties and the struggles, but also what things might be ahead and what might be being revealed, then you get more buy-in and there's more. You're not trying to sell it all the time. It's just naturally beginning to happen. And the inertia towards a hybrid experience begins to outweigh that inertia towards going back to what we've always known. So I begin and end my time with you asking the questions of you as pastoral leadership, as worship leadership, is one, do you buy into it? Can you articulate what you believe about having this expanded understanding of church and gatherings? And do you get a sense of why you are there and what's drawing and calling you into that space? And then what's your capacity for making that happen? And what do you need to help make that happen? All right, so end with those. I bookend with, it's just really a leadership question for most of us about how we're leading our communities into this space, through it, and onto whatever God may be revealing on the other side. All right, so there you go. There's my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing, and let's go to some Q&A. Woo! Uh-oh.
Here, I remember to unmute myself.
we have a thing in one of our groups. It's like a cuss cup. Now, every time you forget to unmute yourself, it's $1 in the unmute cup. We're trying to figure out how do you actually, Zoom should create that. Somebody create that. Work on an app, get that created. It'll go to a good cause. All right, questions.
So if I understand correctly, you have been doing this hybrid worship for a while now, right? This preceded the event of the pandemic. Is that correct?
So not at this particular church. So we moved, I'm moving this church, but in communities prior, yes.
Okay. And so, as you've invited all of us to think about whether we have the capacity well, first of all, can articulate a theological vision for why we want to be doing hybrid worship, and then understanding community and church, a living community, as being more than out just our four walls, right? But as you were launching into this, what surprised you along the way, and what caught you up short?
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I think we buy into this idea that this is a young person's game. I think that we and that does a disservice to everyone. We want to do this. I can't do it, so I'm going to get the youngest person in the community. Surely they can do all this. I think it sets young people up for failure. We do it over and over again, and it discounts a real passion and perspective and life stage of some of our older folks who love this stuff and can help build foundations. And so I know that oftentimes it surprises me about who's into it and who isn't, that doesn't fit a generational demographic. I mean, I think that, there are youth conferences and things talking about this summer, like, we should just do all of our stuff on Zoom. And I'm like, I can tell you, my kids, the last thing they want to do is hop on another Zoom meeting, right? Now, you shift over and you do Instagram Live and you bring a concert person in and they do a concert every night on Instagram Live, they might tune in for that. So I think part of it is understanding kind of where people are and their context, but the age piece certainly is the one that I think most people get tripped up on. And I'm always surprised at how people will surprise me. I mean, we have these, we have multiple 90-year-olds that are at our worship service every Sunday. And so, they're on, and we're like, okay. Things that have caught me up short. I mean, I think whenever I've thought if I've pushed it without bringing folks along with me, those things never work. Like I can dabble in stuff and put some teasers out, but if I haven't built that community that is engaged in this and are feeling like they're encouraged to also try, and like I have a tendency, I'm a Clifton Strengths person, and so one of my strengths is activator. I'm like, all right, let's go. And so often I just will just head out, and years of leaving dead bodies in my wake have reminded me that I can't always do that. Sometimes it's the best thing, but there are moments where I need to take a breath, pause, gather some other folks, and then we go. So making sure that as excited as I am about where things head, that a church of one is not an experience that I want to have. So that part of it is when folks are really engaged, excited, they still got to lean into those leadership qualities of bringing folks along, helping people discern, asking the right questions, acknowledging struggle, and then hopefully experience some new life towards the end of that process.
So let's say I'm, leading a community, and we have discerned a robust understanding of community that expands beyond our four walls. I can articulate that vision, and we can articulate it together. I built that. We feel that we have the desire and that capacity. We're still looking toward trying to equip ourselves with skills. But we have some questions here that are very specific to what technology, what equipment do I need to have that capacity? Because we know that it is also involving sort of technology. So what mics, lighting, and in knowing that, when you start adding cameras and lighting and things into a worship space, it changes the worship space itself, right?
Yeah. So it's the cool thing right now is, there's a fine line between communities and companies profiteering off of COVID-19 and providing resources that were like, oh, we need this now, and thank you for creating this space. So some of the things that are happening now is your cameras are getting much smaller, and they're now visual cameras, so they'll be able to follow people as they move back and forth. And so and I can't remember the name of it offhand, but they're not cheap. This is the piece where I think our small churches depending on the resources, that's really going to be, again, that divide is just going to get bigger. So I hope that in the Presbyterian Church, a lot of our presbyteries, which are geographic, they're usually, I don't know, 10 to 50 churches. They're helping fund some of this for some of our small churches because they just can't afford to put $3,000 into a new system. So the cameras that now it's I can't remember the name, but it follows you as you go. So you can actually be standing, speaking, leading, and your camera is doing this. And so it will actually be able to track you as you go. And it is not obtrusive. I want just obtrusiveness to remind people that they're not just in this space without it being tacky and gaudy. I mean, I think there's that weird line. And now that there is opportunity for the companies have done. So again, with your microphones, like what are your microphones? So I'm partial towards Blue Yetis for wider space. For podcasting and for just speaking one person, the Rode Podcaster is the one that I will use. So, and those are higher end, right? You're getting into the $400. Well, the Yeti is a little cheaper, but you go to the Podcaster and that level, you're talking about $400 a shot, which is, for some churches, you're not gonna be able to do that. So the Blue Snowballs are a great other one. That's a really basic one. If you're still doing worship, if you have not bought an external microphone, please go order that today. That is one of the pieces that just go get it. And so I would say that you're looking at tiers up. But the Blue Yeti and the Rode Podcaster are the two that I've used and really, really, really like. So, but the Blue Snowball, the one I have in my office, everybody can see, my Blue Snowball is also just an adequate piece. So there's ways so that kind of stuff can happen. Now, lighting, that's just going to depend on every congregation in that sanctuary space and what that's going to look like. Lighting for leadership is going to be more difficult. That's why I'm creating a DJ station more, so the lighting is a little bit more. I can still move, but the lighting can be a little bit better for people at home. I think that we're going to have most of our folks who are going to stay online, and then we're going to have a very, very small on-site presence when we reopen. Our seniors have already told us that until there's a vaccine, they're not coming back. They're like, Zoom's been great. We're not coming back. So that made it very easy for us to decide we're not even going to try until 2021. So I think the folks who will be there are going to be folks who are really excited about this new kind of how we're going to do this in a traditionally older historic congregation who have just embraced this kind of new way of being, which has been kind of cool. Yeah. All right. What's my DJ desk lighting? Somebody asked in the. So I have, you can buy them. I bought them on Amazon. They're just 2 desktop lights. The key is to switch into 200-watt daytime LEDs. So you want to, none of the lights are bright enough generally, especially if you are outside or you're going to do something when there's any backlighting, anything like that. So right now, so I have in my office, I just have a swing arm light thing here. There you go. It's just on a swing arm, and I can then point it around. So if you are in your office space, swing arm lights are the best. Swing arm microphones and everything, because then you can just always move them around. You're not having to worry about where your head is faced. So there you go. All right.
We have another very specific question about linking to Facebook live stream and Zoom. I wonder whether you might, and also attend to, what kind of Wi-Fi bandwidth we might need for that.
Yes.
Sustainability for sustaining that.
Fast. I mean, it's just, that has been, I think the two things that, as I've talked with pastors about what they're going to do next, and some would love to do this, but the Wi-Fi capabilities for some of their members, as well as their facilities, are just, they can't sustain it. So I think if you're in a place that's dense enough to have fiber, that's what I would go with. We run ours off about, it's a 600 MPS. So that does just fine. Always plug in. I mean, I just tell folks, these are kind of basics, right? Always plug into the Ethernet directly. Just to make sure that you're always going to have your fastest speed. And generally when you plug in, you get more speed than your you're given. So I would do that. That's one thing. So I have a mixed idea about streaming your Zoom experience. So the positive is you get more viewers, and could be a little bit easier for people to get to. Facebook is very unreliable, Facebook Live, especially on the East Coast as it moves towards the West Coast and Sunday morning. What we consistently hear is that Facebook doesn't always connect. It's all those. So our debate is whether we go YouTube Live. That's what we're thinking about. But I think the joy of the Zoom experience is actually interacting and seeing the faces. So when you open it up to that next streaming, it becomes that place where folks just observe it. So if you do it, if you want to do Facebook streaming, have a Facebook deacon so that they're in that chat room on Facebook, making sure that the church is present there. So it's not just, hey, click on this and you can watch what's going on. It's click on this and you too can, as much as we can in the streaming kind of thing, you're actually in this church as well. So you have a couple people in that room. It's greeting people, maybe shooting questions over into the sanctuary space, whatever it is. But try to integrate that space as much as possible into that interactive kind of space that Zoom is so good about.
Right.
Cool.
You know what? Many of our congregations are Eucharistically centered worship. Right. And so tell us, could you speak a little bit about how Eucharist fits into the expanded table vision?
So what have you all decided? Has the denomination as a body said yes, no, wait? I don't know where you all are.
So the denomination doesn't work that way, right?
Okay.
When we have some differing Eucharistic theologies about presence, real presence, and who can take and who can't, whether that can,
right.
Whether the bread and the wine can be consecrated across the waves or not. So that is not and particularly in this diocese, we hold the space for a variety of views on that. But yeah.
So there hasn't been any kind of yes, no, maybe so from any denominational or judicatory kinds of things.
Pure communion is something that is acceptable.
Yeah. So in our tradition, people can very rarely tell us what to do, but we are a community that prides ourselves on being connectional. So when this first started, we're doing communion, and our first that came out of our denominational offices was wait until you gather again. That it's not like you don't do it online. Wait till you gather again. They can't. There's actually they can't direct us and mandate anything, but there was strong words. But then our folks were like, well, we actually believe these are extraordinary times, and we are going to have communion every time because it's important for us. And so so then it was revised about 2 weeks later to say these are extraordinary times. Feel free to share communion as you. So in the way we do it, we don't have any rules around. We believe in the breaking of the bread and the pouring of the cup. Christ is with us in that experience. So ours is we tell folks bring something to eat and drink, and bring it into the space. And we end with communion in our order of worship. We always end with communion right before we're sent into the world, feasting before we go out. And so in our how we do it, and not every Presbyterian church does this way. I've always wanted to go to every Sunday communion. It's, the churches I started, we were always every Sunday, but that is not a tradition in the Presbyterian church. And now we've gone to that. So we share in communion every Sunday. And I have some videos up about how we do it and all those kind of things. But it's one of the most beautiful parts is when everybody is holding their bread to the camera. And there's this moment where you see what everybody is partaking, and then they hold the cup, whatever they're doing. So that fits into our kind of how we respond to the word is gathering at the table. And I do a whole thing about the expanded table, and then partaking in the bread and the cup, and then being sent into the world. So we do that every Sunday. So I think every community is going to have to develop their liturgy and develop kind of their flow and all that about how that works best for their folks.
So there's queuing up a few questions here.
Yeah.
What is, so you've discussed a number of different roles, right? And it sounds like you've got quite a team there who are playing different roles of deacons and greeters. How do you make time for this work as well as the pastoral care and other things that are involved in running a church?
What, everybody can't do everything? Oh my gosh, what's going on? So, I mean, I think this is, you prioritize and be honest with your community. So we're a 2-pastor church and we don't have the other person right now. So they know, so in my conversations, I'm like, here's what's not getting done. And the session has to agree and like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I also have an amazing, in most traditions are called our deacons, and our Presbyterian traditions are deacons, but it's a care and compassion group that has been around for a long time, where visitation for our community, people don't see real visitation is when the pastor comes, and then visitation with everybody else is just a visit. We have this great, so I don't do a lot of visitation. That group tells me, when I was meeting in person, right, they would tell me, here's who you need to go visit this month. So I'm not even tracking it. It's like this gift for me to be in a community like this. And now they're like, here's are the people you need to call. It's time for, and so that I have a group that frees my pastoral care time up in that way. And then I after I've been ordained 25 years, I think. I'm just really good with my time. I don't, and Zoom helps that. I mean, Zoom meetings are much more efficient than people gathering around a table. So the big things are, I'm in very honest communication with my personnel and session about what can or can't get done, and what do they want me, where does my call intersect with what they're hoping for from their head of staff. So for instance, I'm a head of staff that doesn't do personnel, because when I came, it was like, I can do it, it's fine, but you really want me here. You've called me here for these things. So this part, how are we going to make that happen? So it's very clear. My boundaries before COVID were really good. Like, people know from Thursday afternoon all the way through Saturday afternoon, I'm not available. I mean, emergencies, obviously. COVID time, everybody over functions, and now we're getting back into that. So really taking your time off. The other piece is, I would say that if you have not taken a Sunday off yet, you have to take a complete Sunday off. If you have not tended to your own spirit and soul and body during this time, you've got to take a Sunday off. Some of our presbyteries, what our presbytery leadership are doing is they're doing a Sunday where they're doing worship, and all pastors just take the Sunday off and send all their folks to the Zoom worship. Others, it's a control issue. If I go take a day off, what will happen? I promise your community will be fine. I am a huge control freak when it comes to my slides and all of that. And I went away, unplugged for 3 straight days, and it was fine. So you got to take, because I think people, especially pastoral leadership and church leadership right now, we have no idea how exhausting this has been. We're holding so much right now that you have, and your folks, I mean, some churches, they're going to be really good about making you take your time. But many of them, and it's not out of maliciousness, they're not going to push you to take that time off. You got to take it. And I think that frees you up to be more focused and energetic around the things long term. Because now we're in this long term. We're no longer in kind of that first push. So take some time off. And I do that.
Yeah. So turning back to some technology things and your experience currently in the not hybrid, but just the Zoom or at a distance. What's been your experience between the balance of pre-recorded versus live elements? What works best pre-recorded? What works best live?
Yeah. So we don't do any pre-recorded. Every context, every community is going to have to figure out, one, what they have the capacity for. If your internet is not good, pre-recorded is the only way you can really go. If you know that your folks are not plugged into the internet, I pre-recorded is. So there's no hierarchy for me. I go strictly live the whole way through. And there are a couple of reasons. I know myself, if I did pre-recorded, I would not be able to do one take and say, okay, here we go, we're just going to post that. I would probably do multiple takes and want to get it right. And if I stumbled, I'd want to record it again. And that's just, so my personality, I don't want to feed that part of myself. So that's one. And I love leading worship and engaging people and interacting with people. And so we do live from prelude at 9:55 all the way to coffee hour at 11:30. Ours is completely live. So I think it's capacity.
So does that mean that I know that some places have choirs and they just so lovely put together a choir?
Yeah, we've just made the decision we don't do that.
Sorry?
We've just made the decision we're not doing recorded choirs and putting it together. So we certainly have some people that are like, oh, I wish we, well, the other thing is every week, and we probably all get these, we get, oh, here I saw this choir did this thing, and it's that multiple square. Right. And I always have to remind people, I'm like, we do not have the capacity, the skill, or the time to do one of those. Now, because those are highly produced, like this is not, it's not magic. Like there's a lot that has to go into this. So, we are playing with like acapella. That's a app. If folks haven't used that, that's a decent one. 9 voices or one person doing 9 parts. You can do that. That's an easy phone-based one. There's some other ones you can try, but we've just made the decision we're not going to pre-record. Now we may change that at some point, but I love the live. So we still sing. We just mute everybody. Our organist, pianist, is playing. We bring people in and they just play. And there's things you do. You put them on original sound. Everybody knows it's not going to be perfect, but I think everybody's used to it. Some of our music people are a little bit more like we want to see the actual notes on the screen and those kind of things, but we're trying to just say we've made the choice. I made the choice. Our worship team has made the choice to go completely live. And here are the things that we give up, but here are the things that are pretty amazing that in live that we don't get otherwise.
So, any period of transition, there will be pastoral care needs as far as moving into a new direction, right? As you transition from one space to another, one vision to another. If you could talk a little bit about the balance of making sure that those who don't feel comfortable with new technology are not feeling left behind, that they're concerns or... So
I have 3 kind of areas when I think about that. One is my job as a pastor is not to run their tech. Like my job is to love folks. I mean, I just feel like that's at the center of my calling, is to love people. I don't, that whole thing. I don't have to like you, but I will love you. And when you need your church to be there, we will be there either through me or someone else. So my primary, like if folks don't feel like their pastor loves them, I think that's a bigger issue than whether you're going to help move them along technologically. That goes a long way. So when I got to this church, I met with every member. We got them getting used to my technology. They were able to grab appointments online, or they call the church and they grab them online. So I built in this kind of, we're building into new ways of communicating. So that was very intentional on my part. But it was all about me developing a relationship with these folks, so that they could trust that I wasn't just trying to head off somewhere, but we're moving this community together. And I would ask them about why is this community so lovely to you? What has transformed your life about this? So that they know that I'm interested in how they've experienced this community. So if you haven't done that work around making sure that people know that your primary role there is to love and pastor them in life and their spirit and all that's work that needs to be done. The second is I do a lot of talk. The reason I was brought to this church was to think about how do we retell our story. So as a lot of folks, there's 2 comments that'll come. One, not everybody is welcome. And people often say that when they're talking about themselves. I mean, it's just more of a, some people can't do this. I'm like, well, is it really, you're feeling a little bit left behind? I mean, so in a good relationship, I will push back a little bit and say, our physical gathering left people behind. Like, how do you get to that space where you can push folks to realize that it's not as if our physical gathering was this magnet that everybody was going to, and we were fighting people off at the door, our physical gatherings had limitations, whether it was location, whether it was the look, whether it was the culture, whether it was economics, whether it was racial, whatever it is, they had limitations. So as long as folks can get into that kind of like, oh, okay, so we're understanding that none of these things is perfect, then you begin to open up the pieces. And then the third piece is there will be people left behind. And so how do you create a culture and a community that tends to the people who, for this technology, it's never going to be part of their life? So we have 12 people in our congregation that don't use email, are not able, willing, for whatever reason. I don't, they can decide, or if it's circumstance, whatever. So we print out 10 copies of our newsletter, and those get mailed to them. Our care team makes sure that they call them every couple of weeks and talk with them. So our promise to them is our church is doing this, and someday we'll be back in the sanctuary, and then you can come back and do that. But in the meantime, we are going to make sure that we tend to you as best as we can, so that so that we're not actually leaving them behind. We're doing as much as we can to keep them embedded in the community. And it just takes a little bit of extra effort. That is important, because as other people are moving forward, like the questions about, so where's Frances? Like, well, Frances can't quite get online, but here's what we're doing. She gets a mail through the actual mail, our newsletter, any letter that I put out, and then so-and-so is in charge of calling her every couple of weeks. So that folks are feeling like, yes, we're in some ways, we've moved into a whole new space that they're never going to be, but we're not like saying, see ya, you're on your own. So thinking more fully about that whole arc of pastoral leadership, and then how do you actually tend to the people who are going to feel online and be used as an excuse not to do things by others. Make sure that you're tending those people as best you can.
Great, thanks. Now, recognizing that this is a webinar on expanded table focusing on worship, we also know that our buildings are used for more than just worship on Sundays, right?
Yes.
That's a vibrant part of who we are and how we serve our communities fully. And in fact, that table is the Monday through Saturday we do. And so in your own congregation, you've chosen that you will not regather until 2020. But how about those organizations that utilize your spaces, like?
The language we picked was intentional. So the letter that our congregation was, we are not doing any physical gatherings of worship. So that leaves open, and we are negotiating with our tenants and renters as appropriate as they're developing their opening up plans. So what our responsibility is to keep our space as safe as possible, but to allow folks to. So the AA recovery groups, we have about 12 of them that were off campus all this time. And as they're developing what they're going to do next, we're in conversation about, we have space. We're willing to let that be open again as they're developing their plans. We have really pushed ourselves not to micromanage any other organizations, but to be able to create a space where it's safe for people. So like we're negotiating with one of those like super COVID cleaning services that kind of come in with the atomizers. And so what does that look like? It's a little more logistics on our administrators' part about making sure people don't cross over. What we have kind of come to the conclusion is we have 2 big renters and a bunch of recovery groups, is that we're doing as little crossover as space as possible. And that's just kind of been our thing. But we're very clear that the folks that are using our space are all kind of mission-minded. They will come up with their opening plans, and we will be flexible with them. What we have said is the thing that I don't want to do with our space is create any temptation for people to misbehave or to spread. And that's like, I love my folks, but I tell them all the time, I'm like, I know y'all, right? You haven't seen each other face to face in 3 months. You're going to walk into that sanctuary and every cell in your body you won't touch each other, but you're going to want to get close. And I feel it's almost cruel to put people in that position before you're really ready to know what that's going to look like long term. So that's why we said it to our group, is like, we're not going to do that to you. It also left open for us, if there are people in our groups that want to do 10 or less, we're not encouraging it by any means, but we are leaving that open because we do know we have some folks that are like, what if 4 families want to gather outside in our big courtyard and we're in all 4 corners? I'm like, well, I can think of hypotheticals for days. If you want to think about that, we might be open to it. So I think that we try to be flexible, but we're very clear that we're not looking at gathering for worship experiences until 2021. And that just frees us up to plan better, to think about what we're doing, to integrate people in. So by the time we get there, our community will be fully hybrid thinking. And then we'll just practice that again when we start gathering. That transition, if all goes the way that I hope it goes, that transition back into the space is actually going to be much more hybrid, more people offline or off-site than in the sanctuary itself.
Okay, thanks. So I have tried the best I can to moderate the questions that I see in the chat area as well as the Q&A. Want to invite those who are watching to, if we haven't picked up on your question and you still have a live question, please retype it. And Peter, you might have eyes on questions that I didn't raise up. Do you have any, Peter, that you saw that we...
And folks can feel free at Reyes-Chow on Twitter or any other thing. Feel free to keep interacting. I'm like always on there for the most part, getting in trouble occasionally. Some conservative churches have gone after the church I'm serving because we're now heretics, apparently, for not wanting to gather.
Bruce, one question I had, which comes up frequently among our parishes, is the security of online
yes.
on churches, and to make them as accessible as possible, but also as secure as possible.
Yeah. So I at the very beginning, I was in that camp of let's make it accessible as possible. And then I was in 3 meetings that got Zoom bombed. So I was convinced pretty quickly that we just need to adapt and not fight the security measures. And since now the congregation I was serving, we were pretty waiting room early. When waiting room early isn't good for security, if you're a big congregation and you're not checking people anyway, right? That it's a deterrent, but it's not really anything strong. But embedding passwords, using Bitly so that your long passwords can't be searched, not putting it out publicly, using registration. There's all those kind of things that the more hurdles you place, the less likely the generic hackers are going to be able to kind of infiltrate. So what we do know that when folks get their emails of their links to get into worship after registering, they got what I've seen from churches is that's the number one way that people are still getting bombed is those emails aren't being kept within their communities. So those emails are getting shared and pushed out, and those are getting searched and spidered and all that kind of stuff. So, but I think use all the security measures, embed your passwords, do the waiting room. If you're a small enough community, check to make sure you know who's in the waiting room. Don't live stream if you have children on your Zoom. I think that's a piece that you have to really I just wouldn't do it. So that's another reason not to live stream from Zoom to Facebook or YouTube is I would not be comfortable putting our children out into that internet space. And if you're going to, you got to get sign-offs on it somehow, which becomes a whole nother kind of weirdness to it. So, I would say the congregation I'm serving, one of their struggles, they don't have that many children. So that's not something we're worrying about. I have friends who are being really creative with youth and children in their communities. But so that would be a piece is if you're going to stream and you have kids, I just wouldn't stream. I think it's not worth the risk. So I think I think that's all the security pieces. Yeah. And we haven't been bombed. We've been going since the beginning of March, and we've yet to be any of our meetings get bombed. I'm pretty clear about I'm not going to take those huge risks with the community around the security.
I have just one that was brought up earlier that I'm raised again. And as a chaplain at a school, I'm very aware of this issue.
Oh, sure.
That students are on Zoom all week, right? And they're exhausted. And so how do we reach out and engage those for whom they're experiencing online fatigue, but we certainly do want to engage them in worship. And how do you do that?
Yeah, so I think that's going to be a huge question. I think they don't want to get on again, and I just feel like my own children are like, oh, I don't want one more Zoom. They don't even Zoom with their friends, right? That's not what they're doing. So I think shifting platforms and integrating people in a different way is going to be the way that we can be with those folks. So I'm part of a youth conference in Montreat, North Carolina this summer, and they draw about 1,000 kids per week, but they've canceled the first half of the summer, which I assume they'll do the rest. And so they've just gone over and they're going to do everything on Instagram Live, and that's where people are. And they're not going to just replicate what I pushed them on was don't just try to replicate what you were doing and just put in a conference, but just think about how do you use this platform in a different way. So they'll do one concert a night on live, and in the morning those are pre-recorded. There's going to be a preacher reflection, and then in the middle they're going to do some Instagram Live interviewing kind of things with people. So and people can check in and out of those as they want, and so there's expectation that people are at everything as a conference. I think we just got to let go of some of that because, you and I, right? There's so many things I want to do and these great webinars and all that are going on. I don't get nearly enough of them that I want to go to. So I think for our young folks, we're just going to have to be in multiple platforms and just figure out how to see if we can be in their spaces without kind of invading their spaces. I think that's going to be able to do it. But I would say that I have colleagues that are doing this much better than I. Like I have a friend who's doing yoga with their high schoolers once a week and doing some other mindfulness stuff as they're going through this last weeks of school and that kind of thing. That they're just shifting the gears around what they're offering versus trying to get them into something that we're already doing. Cool.
Let's see, Peter, you want to? We do have one. Let's hear the technology. Might as well ask this. Can we Instagram Live through Facebook?
Can you Instagram Live through Facebook? So so Instagramming Live. Oh, no. There you go. No, but you can pre-record. You can pre-record and put that onto Instagram TV. Right, so that's one way to do it, and that way you get a longer time. Yeah. But that, again, that's like next level. So it's only if you have people who, and for any of this, if you're not consistent, I will say, if you were to come to our worship service, it is so simple. I am a big fan of the least number of transitions and the least number of technological possibilities. Strip it down and then build up. But a lot of folks just started right in and it's like, oh, we have the power, so we're going to use it all. And I'm like, just don't, because that's not going to be good for anyone. So I think that Instagram piece that's like next level. If you've kind of moved through and folks are going to be there, then go ahead and try and stretch out. But if you just start there, nobody's going to come along. I mean, it's going to be a hard.
I think there are now some integrations, but they're at the beginning of that. There's no native integration. So I mean, it would be something to test and try, but it's at this point.
Yeah. I actually don't trust third-party things very often. Like I'm just the least number of places that my stuff has to travel, the better chance that it's not gonna mess up.
Well, this has been wonderful, Bruce. I mean, I've learned a whole lot here, and look forward to engaging people in multiple platforms. And I think for me, you did use the word engagement as being key, and so that's really a value that I hold as far as any time we gather for worship. So thank you, Bruce.
Yep. Good. Very welcome.
And thank you everyone for participating today. And again, feel free to vote at the Bruce's online Facebook group, as well as reaching out to him if you have follow-up questions. Thank you everyone. And we hope to continue these series of discussions, online conversations around Zoom, an integrated church, the hybrid church, with the same type of format as the current situation evolves and regatherings begin, and the way that we have online church continues to change and we learn more. So thank you to Bruce, thank you to Jenifer, thank you to everyone, and We'll be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this event. So we'll send out some follow-up, some of the resources we mentioned, together with some additional links and a recording for you to share. So thank you for participating, everyone, today, and God bless.
Okay, thanks.